My name is Steve Powers. I grew up in Philadelphia. As a 16-year-old, I was in an arts program in a suburban Philadelphia high school called Archbishop Carroll. I also highly don't recommend it. But they did have a daily art class that I could go to instead of a language course, and that was great for me. But in the rudimentary teaching that they were doing, they were teaching still lifes and how to draw, still life objects, and just depressed me to no end. And I was listening to the Smiths. So the combination was really extremely toxic. And graffiti and hip hop led a way out of that, and especially graffiti had line, it had color, it had adventure. Obviously, I wanted stories to talk about on Friday night other than the Smiths record I listened to. So it gave me all that, and it was really great to get into graffiti on the ground floor, I felt. Graffiti at that point was moving from the New York phenomenon it was and was becoming, a universal, it was going worldwide. And on my block in Philadelphia, I lived on a block at the time that had 99 row homes, and at least 50 kids on the block, and they were all writing graffiti, which was probably punishing for the infrastructure. And all the kids had stories, and all the kids had mythological tales of one guy in the neighborhood who's pictured here named Surok, who was just a really cocky, at the time, 17-year-old, kind of looked like Ralph Macchio, so he really had the whole world in his hand. And this is what we were doing. This is actually on I-95, right by the Ben Franklin Bridge in the background. So that was kind of like what was going on a Sunday afternoon in Philadelphia in 1985. But he took me under his wing. He taught me the importance of having a good name and getting out into the world and painting. So he brought me at first to a rooftop in our neighborhood at 63rd Street in West Philadelphia, where I painted Espo, the Funk Master, because I was the master of funk. There I am, creeping into the picture. I still have that jacket. It's got white leather sleeves and a violet top. Perhaps it'll be a significant object someday, we'll see. And I painted these rooftops as a way, these rooftops, and when we say rooftops, we're talking about the vertical walls that extend past the roof level that you can see from the train. And they were really great because they were uncontested spaces. People didn't really care, except for the fact that you might step through their roof. They didn't really care that you were up on their roof painting. As long as they would tell, occasionally I'd get caught or I'd get stopped in the process, and they'd say, hey, there's a weak spot, like somewhere, in the back. Be careful of that. But most of the time, people were really cool and generous about it. And this is one that we painted legally, sometime in 1989 or 90. And, I went on to, I painted graffiti literally from like 84 to 99, from like 16 to about, I can't do the math, 31. And, in that time, I kept finding new and different things to do with it. I didn't fully exhaust the medium until I had written a book about it and I got arrested, and I really came full circle with it. And I was really fully an overgrown child, still am. But at this point here, in 1995, I was playing with the idea of like, oh, well, graffiti writers, they're just like brands anyway. They're just these kids that they adopt a name, and graffiti becomes advertising for what their product is, which is style, nothing more than. And I was really fascinated by advertising all my life, and I thought, well, it's really cool to kind of like co-opt some of the things. Advertising's been co-opting graffiti all this time. It'd be great to co-opt some of the advertising power for what we were doing in graffiti. So I did here. It says, new, Espo, stays on point, and so I was on point. And then when I moved to New York, in 1994, I had a magazine called On The Go that was a graffiti hip-hop periodical. And we had a great idea when we were publishing the magazine, and we were talking to, advertising people in New York, and we were selling advertising. We thought, we're not big like The Source and the other magazines that we're competing against. We're real small, but we talked to like the 500 or the 5,000 coolest kids in the room. And it was this thing that, turned out to be niche marketing, and we were exactly 5 years too early for. But I continued to paint in the street, and this is like from about 2000, or maybe 99. Barry McGee and Margaret Kilgallen were showing down the street at Deitch Projects, and I was reacting to my excitement to that. And at the same time, the Soho Grand had just opened up next door, and so I painted this comment on that, again, extending the brand. And there's the crown in there because, I'm a king. And, making a joke about, hot sheet hotels and how, like, every hotel, regardless of its $400 price tag and its boutique room, and, ends up being a hot sheet hotel for somebody at some point. And this is actually on a really amazing New York artist named Mimi Gross, who hated me for years after I painted this, and is now the godmother to my child, Malcolm. Thanks, Mimi. But, after a while, I realized just painting these anonymous signals, logos, advertising at the periphery of a community and broadcasting to the center of the community was kind of not where I wanted to be, and I was looking for something with a little more power to it. And I realized I'd been taking inspiration from Coney Island and, from the signage in Coney Island. The Coney Island palette is beautiful. It's red, yellow, it's blue, it's primary colors. Every sign in Coney Island advertises pleasure, whether it's a ride or it's a hot dog. So it spoke to a lot of things that I thought were really important and necessary to me. So I started painting signs in Coney Island. I saw that the visual landscape in Coney Island was changing. The hand-painted signs that had existed for 100 years were suddenly being replaced by like cheap computer-generated signs. And the whole visual character was disappearing right before my eyes. So in order to, A, replenish the stock that I was ripping off endlessly, and B, try to like impact the visual landscape a little bit and curate and art direct what I thought Coney Island should look like, I've started volunteering my services. And to me, giving away art is nothing. Like, I gave away art for 15 years, like, on every wall that suited me. So to go down to Coney Island and offer my services and paint signs that I knew would last for years was a no-brainer. And in Coney Island, when you say free, they say there's a scam happening, and I had a lot of resistance. Like, if I charged $1 or $10, I might have gotten a lot more work up front. But when I said free, everybody sensed there was a rip-off happening, and it was very hard to get to do the first couple signs. But once I did the first couple signs, it was a landslide. And it culminated in me getting to paint the Cyclone, which, I took full advantage of the opportunity to pose with it. The Cyclone is 78, 80 years old at this point. The wood that I painted on the Cyclone is the same wood that was on that coaster 80 years ago. When you ride the Cyclone, you're riding the same ride that Lou Gehrig rode, Babe Ruth rode, whoever. I think Charles Lindbergh said it was more exciting than flying a plane across the Atlantic. Well, it should have been, because back in Charles Lindbergh's time, there were no seat belts and no padding on it. So you're sitting on a wood bench and you're just like, who knows what kept you in place? I have no idea. So when I found that out, I really felt cheated. Like, all right, I'm paying $6 and I'm not getting the full experience? What a rip. That was like the first or second sign that we painted. And what's great about the guy that runs the El Dorado is a guy named Scott. He's a very exacting guy. And he would come out to me and he'd say, the lettering's wrong. I don't like the lettering. And I'd try to argue with him, and he goes, hey. I've got, my bumper cars. When I have to adjust the nuts on my bumper cars, I have to adjust them to 62 newtons per square meter. None of this pounds per square inch bullshit, so don't fool with me. I know what exact is. What do you do with a guy like that? So you apologize and you walk away. Nobody in Coney Island thanked us for anything. When you get thanked in Coney Island, that implies some kind of a debt, and nobody is trying to be in debt to you in Coney Island. So I had the idea for doing a story, I wrote graffiti for 15 years, and then I took 10 years to make art and be in galleries, and I showed at Dice Projects, and I showed at a lot of great places around the world. And, I started kicking around the idea about doing a project in Philadelphia on the rooftops that I painted as a kid that, since I left town, they'd all been painted brown. The transit system in Philadelphia was rebuilding the elevated train in the neighborhood, and it just decimated the neighborhood. They closed off Market Street, which was a major artery for the neighborhood, and it felt like half the population had disappeared in the time that I was gone. So I applied for a grant. We got shut down, but at the same time I won a Fulbright, which enabled me to go to Dublin and realize some of the ideas. So on a wall in Dublin, in a neighborhood called the Liberties, which is, was the dangerous neighborhood for 200 years in Dublin, I took spray paint, and in the original spray paint that I used on the Espo the Funk Master roof, black and silver, black and white, on like the crummiest surface available, which is called Pebble Dash, I painted this, and it says, "Baby is crying, the rent is all spent, the car got towed, probably because I parked it where I shouldn't have. I lost the remote, there's no hot water, the fridge is empty, but I ordered food. Please come home." And this is called Baby Mother's Day, and it really represented the fact that I was away from my family, and that very New York experience of like, you know, as long as you're home, as long as somebody's home, then we have a home. So I went on and, you know, painted more walls and really tried to get to the heart of relationships by examining my own relationship, translating that experience, and putting it in the paintings that I was doing. And these are, you know, very simple, using the very basic materials that graffiti artists use: black, white, you know, the cheapest spray paint I could find, some latex roller paint, and in this case, an 80-foot scissor lift, which is always really handy. And then I was able to come home. We won the grant in Philadelphia on the second try around. The Pew Foundation generously supported this project. And I was able to come back to Philadelphia and really take the neighborhood. At this point, you know, the neighborhood just was at its lowest ebb, but the train line was finished and it was ready to come back. And everybody in the neighborhood was ready to get their hands on whatever energy was coming back to the neighborhood. So we went, and the Mural Arts Program, who I worked on the project with, their whole methodology is to go and have community meetings and talk to people and get everybody's opinion on the block as to what color the wall should be, what should be on the wall. You know, they painted 3,000 murals in Philly, and they're not so much an art program as they are a civic program that uses art as a conduit. So me, being a graffiti writer who hated anti-graffiti, which is the original incarnation of the Mural Arts Program, and as Mural Arts Program, I wasn't too impressed with the work. It was at first it was a really uneasy marriage, and we both had vested interest in working with each other, but we weren't really sure how it was going to play out. And what I did was I agreed to embrace their methodology. I went out and talked to communities all over West Philadelphia. And, you know, as a graffiti writer, to stand in front of a room of, you know, 60 people and explain to them that I was going to spray paint their walls and it was going to be really a good idea, you know, it was definitely one to grow on. I mean, graffiti writers like to swap stories about their war stories, but I think the community meeting thing really trumped everybody's card. So the first wall we painted, you know, and after getting all the data we could from the meetings, you know, I went out and I already had this in mind. I wanted to create a love story between two people, a woman that's taking the train and a guy that's trying to get her attention, who's cut off from every form of communication possible. So he resorts to painting these rooftops as a way of getting her attention. We wrote a script. We're in the process of editing a film about it, but the core reaction I wanted was this. I got daycare money and car fare honey from now on. And this is across the street from a daycare center. And then I was trying to like kind of tie these things together. And we painted this, and it was painted over the next day by the Anti-Graffiti Network, which still exists in Philadelphia. They're just separate from the Mural Arts Program, and they do their own thing. And when I called up to the guy that painted it, you know, we actually got to use his bucket truck, the Ford, you know, 750 or whatever, and his beautiful lift, and we were able to like use his power sprayer to like paint graffiti with and laugh at him. And I asked him, like, what were you thinking painting that? He goes, I knew you were just doing it. I thought you were just doing it for some girl. I didn't know it was for a Mural Arts Program, which is exactly what I wanted him to think. I wanted the average passerby to get the idea that this was for another person. This is one person talking to another person. And at the same time, the neighborhood speaking to itself and the city. This says, if you were here, I'd be home now. And it's, again, it's, you know, to mention my son again and again, it's, you know, the refrigerator magnets, and he was playing with them at the time, and it really has that domestic feel to it. And this is a radical departure from what the Mural Arts Program does. The Mural Arts Program typically does these elaborate, three-story, hallucinatory fables of positivity. And this is really just graphic, you know, about the give and take, you know, real-life situations. And it was really inspired by, to bring it back to graffiti, and, you know, we were putting graffiti point blank back in place where it had been all this time and it was gone for 10 years. So we had this is a wall that was painted in the early 80s that says David got the butter. It was an advertisement for a drug dealer at 8th and Butler, presumably named David. And, you know, we took the negativity and the obvious, like, you know, awful drug pornography of that, and we put the human content and really the day-to-day emotions that people deal with. So it says, I got the butter, I got the bread, I got the milk, I got the blame. And we were able to take, in the final, like, awesome, you know, really the circuit closing, this was a wall that was painted by the Anti-Graffiti Network in like 1985, and it was done in the style that they did at the time, which was really boring, bland depictions of nature. And we got permission to paint the wall, so we did what we always wanted to do as graffiti writers, which was like paint graffiti on top of it. But what we did that was really important to us was we took a wall that wasn't really saying anything about the community, and we changed it just a bit so it really said a lot about the community. We had a suggestion from a guy came to a couple meetings, and he felt that the resurgence of the Muslim religion in West Philadelphia did a lot to get rid of the drugs and the gangs in West Philadelphia, and he thought one of the walls should say, Islam is peace. Okay, great, here it is. And as the guy that was painting it was doing it, people from the neighborhood came down and said, what are you painting up there? As they did for every wall we painted. And when they said, we're painting Islam is peace, people got really excited, like they pumped their fists. They were like, they felt like it was for them. And the guy that's at the bottom of the wall, you know, it's a fisherman, which, well, fishermen haven't been in West Philly for at least 200 years. But we took the opportunity to change them up a little bit and have them more reflective of the message and also the average Muslim 18-year-old kid in West Philadelphia. So this is graffiti at its finest. We got to do signs for the community, which was, you know, when really giving people a chance to make money, and that's where the rubber hits the road for a project like this. People don't need art, they really need economic stimulus. So we were able to do signs for businesses, and again, art direct and import like what we felt to be important in the way of design. And you know, it was a really successful project, and it continues to impact the neighborhood. People continue to talk about it. People continue to come back to West Philly to see the project. We have books in the lobby. You should check it out. They're for sale. And I really thank you for your time.